Hi everybody, Tom here from HighByte, and welcome back. I've got a quick little interlude for you today. I want to talk a bit about code and JavaScript objects, things like that that are going to make our lives a lot easier when we are working with Intelligence Hub. Now, you probably know that Intelligence Hub is a low-code, or in many cases a no-code solution. But if it's low-code, what does that mean that remains? What code do we still need to understand? So I'm going to go through that today. I'm going to, here at Intelligence Hub, I'm going to log in. I'm going to use this functions module as our little demonstration area. So we're going to go through what the functions module is really intended for, but we can flex on it a little bit today. So what are we looking at today? Now, there's a lot in programming that we're not going to go through. We're not going to make applications. We're not going to create pages or web pages or data structures, anything too complicated like that. What we are going to want to look at is making variables and making and working with objects. That's all just sort of a way to interact with data as it goes through Intelligence Hub, because when we bring information into an Intelligence Hub, it's modeled as an object, as a JavaScript object using JavaScript Object Notation, or JSON. So when you hear anybody say it's a JSON, it means it follows this particular scheme. So what does that really mean? Let's start a little bit earlier than that. When we make variables, they can be individual pieces of data, or they can be objects. What does that look like? If I use this keyword let here, that means I'm going to make a new variable. And a variable can be anything that I want it to be. I can name it anything that isn't already reserved. So here I've called it my variable, and I can set it equal to values. They can be numeric, or they can be strings of characters like words, or strings is what we usually call them. So hello. Perfect, right? So those are, there's sort of other more niche options, but those are probably the two that we're going to use for the most part here. So my variable is hello, and I've used let because it's the first time I'm using it. When I change the value of my variable equals 46. I don't have to say let again because the computer already knows that it exists. Let is just to say this is going to exist for the first time right here. Okay. Now, if I want to get the value out of that, let's say I want to print it, right? So we're going to do a little trick here that we can use to sort of learn as we go. I'm going to do console.log is the command, and parentheses at the end. And then inside, I'm going to say my variable, right? And when I hit run here, this is sort of intended to let us debug our functions, but it lets us do more than that. I can see that I'm printing out over here on the console the value of my variable, right? So if I were to change this to my variable equals 46, and I run, now we're printing out 46 instead. So we're able to make variables and call them back in like this. There's another thing that you can use for variables. It's not just strings or numbers. And what I want to focus on today is the object. Now, objects are kind of like a data structure. I know I said we weren't going to be making data structures. We're not going to do anything too complicated, but this is a way to organize data hierarchically and organized with respect to certain key value pairs. So what is a key value pair? A key value pair could be anything that is like, if I have a feature and something and how it's described. So the example that I'm going to use today is a couple of little wireless mice that I have here. They're a little different, so we're going to be able to model them a little differently. But you could see like how size, small, size, kind of big. So that's how we're going to sort of compare our mice. So let me say this way. I'm going to have small mouse and big mouse. So I'm going to say let small mouse is going to be my, oh my goodness, small mouse is going to be my variable, right? And to say this is an object, it's sort of a thing. It's got more than one piece of information attached to it, right? So we have, it's wireless, it's got a little tray, and how many batteries does it take? It's got none in there now, but it takes a single AA battery, right? It's got 3 buttons. So there's more information that can just be stored in a single number or a single word here. So the way we're going to do that is with a pair of these curly braces. And this in JavaScript indicates that this is going to be an object. This is a JavaScript object. This is JavaScript Object Notation. Now, JavaScript doesn't actually care about white space, so to keep things organized, I'm going to give us a couple line breaks here. We still got the open curly brace and the closed curly brace. We're going to work inside of it, and we're going to create some fields that we want to fill out for our small mouse, and we're going to give those fields values, right? So let's see. I'm going to keep it pretty simple. Size, small, right? So I'm going to say size. I'm going to put this in quotes, and then I'm going to give it a colon. So that is I've defined the key, and I'm going to give it a value, small. And then I'm going to give a comma because we're going to the next attribute. We're going to the next key value pair. What do we got? How many buttons here? 1, 2, 3. We got 3 buttons on this guy. Button. Whoops. Buttons. 3. Okay. One more. Let's do color. Nope. Color. It is, okay, these are actually really close in color. For the sake of it, I'm going to say this guy is gray and this guy is black. Color. Gray. So these key value pairs are separated by commas. And at the end, I don't need an extra comma. It's just sort of the end of the object. So that's my small mouse. Let's do the big mouse now. I'm going to do a let big mouse equal, and we're going to do those curly braces again. A lot of times when you're working in a code editor, like our functions menu here, if you give the open curly brace, it's going to automatically make you the closed curly brace. It's sort of a convenience. It's not always there. Maybe if you do this a lot, you'll get used to it. It can be a little jarring at first, so just be aware you're not going insane when that extra curly brace shows up. All right, so this guy, let's keep it consistent. Size, big. You know, not that big, but let's see how many buttons we have on this guy. So we have the same 1, 2, 3, and there's 2 more right here. So 1, 2, or 4, 5. And then I got 2 more buttons here on the side, 6, 7. Gosh, that actually kind of seems like a lot, doesn't it? Buttons. 7. Comma. And what color is it? Black, we said, right? It's important to point out this is entirely flexible, this structure. So these are just sort of characteristics I'm picking. Depending on where I intend to send this data, it might need certain characteristics, and it might continue to be flexible. But there's nothing in JavaScript that says it needs these characteristics. These are just sort of whatever you're making up to describe whatever it is you're trying to describe. All right. Oop. Buttons. And keep in mind, for that reason, this would, with the typo, would have been totally legal. I just would have gotten confused later on. So we're going to make that buttons. All right. So we got 2 mice here, and we can sort of get data out of them. Now, remember that console.log? How do I access if I want to know how many buttons this has? I'll get down to console.log in a moment, actually. What I'm going to do for this, if I want to know how many buttons this is, I'm going to access this value from this object by typing in my object. And then I'm going to use the dot. So it's just a period, but that operator tells us like, okay, I'm going 1 layer lower. I'm going into the next property. And what is the next property? My IntelliSense here can already kind of guess. It can read what I've been working with, and it knows like, okay, these are the properties you have to choose from. These are the ones you made. So I'm going to get my buttons, bigmouse.buttons. So that is essentially saying this variable should hold the value 7, and we can check it with, let's go down here, bigmouse.buttons. So let's log to the console bigmouse.buttons and run. And there I've got 7. Cool. Pretty much what I expected, but good to know nonetheless. All right. What if I wanted to change how many buttons Big Mouse has? I could do, now I've already got this built. I don't need to use the let keyword. I can just say bigmouse.buttons equals, we'll add an extra button there. Maybe we're counting the the power button there on the bottom. It's a switch. Don't at me. All right, big mouse.buttons equals 8. Let's try that. Okay, now you can see we're accessing that property and we're getting 8. Cool. All right, so let's look back at this for a second. We'll see. What if? Oh, actually, I want to do one more thing here. Let's add. One of the fun things about these gamery mice is they've got lights on them. Now, I don't have a battery in this one either, so I can't show you, but you'll have to take my word for it. So let's add another property to each one of these. Let's say small mouse dot lights equals none. And big mouse dot lights equals blue. Blue. There we go. Perfect. And you might be looking at this like, wait, Tom, what are you doing? What does this mean? We didn't define lights anywhere. No, we didn't. Once your object exists, you can add more properties just by saying that this object that we already know exists because we've already created it here, and this property is going to be added to it. You don't need to use the let keyword. In fact, if you do, you're going to get in trouble. So don't do that. Let's get some of the extra stuff out of the way there. And you'll be able to just add properties to an object as you go. So let's make sure that works. Run. And you can see blue is coming at the other end. So once our property, or once our object is built, you can go ahead and add things to it. So this would be essentially the same as doing little l, lights, blue, right? Oh, and we'd need that comma there. Putting this here and after the fact is pretty equivocal as far as JavaScript is concerned. Now, for your own organization, this probably makes more sense than doing a bunch of these. Maybe it depends on the tendencies of the people you're working with, but you know, this is usually done after the fact. This is usually, you want to build your object as much as you can in the beginning if possible. All right. So that's all fun to say. If we're looking at this, you're probably seeing, okay, let's see, I've got all of these are my keys, and then these are my values, and I see a string value that we talked about. I see a number value that we talked about. But we're actually looking at objects. Can this value be another object? And yes, it can. These objects can be nested. So you can have one object be the result of another one. You get sort of layers down. So let's take a look at, I'm going to take a look at my big mouse here for a second, because we got these 3 buttons. These are the sort of 3 primary buttons, I would say. And those are the ones we're all very familiar with. And then Lord only knows what the other 4 buttons are actually going to do at any given time. So maybe I want to separate those out. Maybe I want to say for big mouse, I've got buttons 7, sure. But maybe I've got another, I'm going to separate this into 2 sets of buttons. So I'm going to give it another object. I get another curly brace here, right? And then I'm going to give them new lines to sort of like let us indent stuff. A lot of times you'll see any given object is indented with a tab, some white space between where it starts, and you get these sort of nice, satisfying looking indented structures. But that's what we're going to look at here. So I got my buttons. I'm going to say we have primary buttons. And we got 3. We got 3 primary buttons, as any good mouse should. If you're using Apple Magic Mouse, don't at me. Or, you know, buy a license and send me a ticket. And then we have secondary. And so we've got, what do we say? 1, 2, 3, 4 secondary buttons. So now our buttons, rather than on our small mouse, is just a number, but on our big mouse is as an object itself, sort of a set of buttons. So let's take a look at this. If I console.log bigmouse.buttons, does that work? You can see I get this object back. In our printout here, it's not indented, so sometimes you might need to get familiar seeing unindented versus indented structures like this. But you can see I have an object here. There's one key and its value, and another key and its value. And of course, that can be as flexible as you need it to be when you set it up. All right. How do I get, maybe I want to know just how many primary buttons it has. That's pretty simple. All I'm going to do is come back to, there's my top level object, and then my next set of object is buttons, and then I'm just going to say dot primary. This is going to let us drill down into our structure and get just the primary buttons. You can run that and you see there's 3. There's the big mouse, buttons, primary, 3. We're getting that value back. Right. So now you should start seeing some familiarity with some JavaScript objects. And I really just made these up on the spot, so it's sort of a testament to there's no right answer to how you organize an object. There are some words you can't use because they're reserved by JavaScript, but for the most part, you got a lot of freedom in how you build your objects. So why are we looking at this? Well, when we move objects, let me open up a pipeline here real quick. When we look at pipelines, every one of these stages is pushing out an object called event. And when we read information into a pipeline or into anywhere else in Intelligence Hub, it's using an object called event. It's essentially, let me get back to my functions, saying let event equal, and you can actually have an empty object, right? This is what a pipeline stage or an input or anything else is generating. It has 2 more properties that are inherent. Now, this is where I said you can make objects that look like whatever you want. Intelligence Hub is going to make objects that look like this. Event is going to have one attribute that is value. And it's going to have one attribute that is metadata. Metadata. There we go. All right. And both of these themselves are probably objects, though not necessarily. You can set these to be strict values, just like you can just set them to be strings or numbers, but they're generally objects. When you read information into Intelligence Hub and you get a message or an event along that pipeline, you're generating an object that holds your information and you're putting it into event.value. So essentially what we've got is, I'm going to use, let's say we read big mouse into Intelligence Hub, right? And then it's going to be read into not event.value, right? Which could be, something like, if we were looking at the speed of a conveyor belt, it'd be like 12 and units, right? So that might be feet per minute. Oh, I need some quotes. There we go. Right. So maybe we read this in, and when we're starting to talk about accessing pieces of information out of your process data, we would say, all right, let's look at event.value.speed, right? Perfect. 12. I can also here, rather than typing in this object exactly, let's say I read big mouse in. I kind of alluded to that. We're just going to say big mouse. Great. So now event.value dot buttons dot secondary. How many secondary buttons does this have? 4, right? So we said event.value itself is equal to the whole object big mouse. And so we went to event.value, which gives us big mouse. And then we went from there into buttons, into secondary. Buttons and secondary. Right. So once we bring information into Intelligence Hub, we can kind of drill down into it and get the pieces that we want. Maybe we want it as the whole object. Maybe we just want one value out of it. It depends on your use case. All right. So what is going on here in event? Now in a pipeline, the important thing here is that things are automatically generated in value, and certain stages place data into value, and certain stages do something with value. So if you read information in from a data source, it's probably going to be placed in event.value. if you write information out from a pipeline, it's probably going to take what's stored in event.value, and that's what it's going to publish to your target. Now, that's just how Intelligence Hub works. That's nothing JavaScript specific. That's just like how our product is developed. So event.value is kind of the staging area and the real activity zone of events, of our messages, our events in Intelligence Hub. Metadata is this other kind of function where, or has this other function where we're able to store things in this space that don't really get used. They're sort of to be carried along in case we want to use them later, right? So I can say, what is the name? Who is the maker of this? Because maybe I want to publish makers to different topics, right? So I might say like maker. I don't even know who made this particular mouse. E.T. All right. Now, nothing is automatically going to happen with what's stored in metadata, but we'll be able to use it to make decisions later on in a pipeline. So that's kind of this separate, quieter piece of the object, quieter piece of an event. But really, most of what we're going to do in our pipelines in Intelligence Hub is going to be based on event.value. All right. I'm going to not go deeper than that. I think everything else is going to get into how Intelligence Hub is working. I really appreciate you guys taking a look at this, and hopefully this made some sense. Hopefully you have a better idea now of what it means to work with JSONs. A lot of times we'll call these objects JSONs. What it means to work with JavaScript objects, and using these, dot notation, we're able to pretty clearly understand one stage to the next. Thanks.